What happens when unchecked authority crosses paths with a woman who outranks him in every way that matters? It was just after 11:00 p.m. on a cold Wednesday night in Toledo, Ohio, the kind of night where the streets fall silent, the city breathes slow, and nothing seems out of place. Nothing, that is, until a black government-issued SUV rolled past Sergeant Brian Kessler's unmarked cruiser. Inside the SUV sat Lieutenant Colonel Camille Rhodes, returning from a strategy briefing 2 hours south. Her posture was relaxed, one hand steady on the wheel, her mind drifting toward home. She wasn't speeding, not swerving, just quietly making her way through the dark. But Kessler wasn't looking for calm. He was looking for control, parked beneath the shadows off Reynolds Road. He sipped his third cup of burnt station coffee, scrolling his phone to kill the drag of a slow shift. No calls, no action, and then movement. An unfamiliar vehicle. Government plates. Tinted windows. Boredom shifted to suspicion in a heartbeat. He tossed the coffee aside and pulled out. The flashing lights lit up the rearview mirror before Camille even realized he was behind her. She blinked, exhaled, and pulled calmly to the shoulder, decades of training kicking in without effort. Her SUV came to a smooth stop. The door of the patrol car slammed like a warning shot. In the side mirror, Camille watched a tall man approach broad shoulders, hand resting dangerously close to his holster, flashlight already raised like a weapon. He didn't approach the passenger side. He came directly to her window. No greeting, no introduction. License and registration. Camille kept her hands where he could see them, rolled the window halfway down, voice steady. "Officer, may I ask why I'm being stopped?" Kessler squinted, flashlight beaming into her eyes. "You were drifting. Failed to signal. Looked like you might be under the influence." She blinked slowly. "I wasn't." "License and registration." He snapped again, louder this time. No point arguing. She moved slowly, deliberately, retrieving her ID from the glove compartment. As she handed it over, her tone remained level. "This is a government vehicle. I'm a federal officer." Kessler glanced down, read the military credentials, then smirked. "You military, yes. That doesn't make you untouchable. I never said it did." The air thickened. His stance hardened. "Step out of the vehicle." Her eyes narrowed, though her voice didn't waver. "On what grounds I've complied? I haven't been drinking. I'd like to know why." He stepped in closer, the threat in his voice unspoken but clear. "So now you're refusing a lawful order." "No," she replied. "I'm requesting clarification." He didn't like that. Without another word, he reached for the door handle and opened it himself. "I need you to exit the vehicle. Now." Camille didn't raise her voice. Didn't resist. But this time, she reached calmly for her phone, unlocked it, and pressed record. "Just so we're clear," she said evenly, "this interaction is being documented." For the first time, something shifted in his eyes, a flicker of hesitation, but not enough to stop him. Out of the car, she stepped out, not defiant, not submissive, just firm, solid, the kind of presence that makes lesser men feel exposed. And for the first time, Brian Kessler really looked at her. Not the ID, not the car. Her. And something in the back of his mind whispered, "What the hell did I just walk into?" But ego drowned it out. He proceeded with a field sobriety test under the dull orange glow of a street lamp. Made her walk a line like she was some drunk on a Saturday night. She passed. Perfectly. No sway, no slur, no stumble. Still, he wrote the ticket. Failure to maintain lane. She took it in silence. Just one look. One long, sharp look that said more than words ever could. Then she got back into her car and drove into the dark. And Sergeant Brian Kessler had no idea that he had just pulled over the wrong woman. Sergeant Brian Kessler had been in the game too long to second-guess himself. 15 years in uniform had molded him into someone his precinct both respected and quietly feared. He wasn't the kind of officer who softened his voice or second-guessed a hunch. He barked orders, not because he was right, but because no one ever told him he was wrong. He was the storm people learned not to challenge. And last night was nothing. Or so he thought. Back at the West Toledo precinct, Kessler strolled in like he owned the place. He filed the report in 5 minutes flat. Failure to maintain lane. Possible signs of impairment. No arrest made. He tossed his body cam in the charger without a second glance. Case closed. At least, to him. By the time the second pot of coffee was brewing in the break room, he was already turning it into a joke. Some Fed lady thought flashing her ID was going to make me back down, he said to Officer Diaz, smirking as he popped a chip into his mouth. Acted like she was royalty or something. I gave her a ticket like I would anybody else. Diaz paused, leaning against the counter. She was military, so she says. Name was Rhodes. Camille Rhodes. Diaz's brow furrowed. Wait, Camille Rhodes, Lieutenant Colonel Rhodes Kessler stopped mid-chew. You know her. She gave a talk at the academy last year, Diaz said, her tone shifting from casual to careful. She's not some random pencil pusher. 2 combat tours. Bronze Star. Runs logistics for Fort Wayne. She's the real deal. Sarge. Kessler scoffed, waving a hand like swatting a fly. Doesn't matter who she is. Out there on the road, I'm the law. But Diaz didn't smile. And that silence, the one where respect replaces words, hung heavy in the air. Kessler didn't know it yet, but the walls were already closing in. Because while he was laughing in the break room, Camille Rhodes wasn't making threats. She was filing a complaint. Not just to Internal Affairs. She went higher. The Office of the Inspector General, the Judge Advocate General, her legal counsel. And she had more than just a story, she had footage. Her footage. His footage. 2 angles. 1 truth. And it was already moving. A copy of the video had made its way up the military chain of command. Quietly, strategically, no fanfare, no press. Kessler, meanwhile, carried on like usual, pulling over teenagers for curfew violations, yelling at delivery drivers for rolling stops, puffing his chest like the badge on it was bulletproof. He didn't see it. Not yet. But this time, the person he tried to intimidate didn't flinch. She didn't threaten. She documented. She didn't escalate. She exposed. She didn't shout. She followed protocol better than he ever had. And while Brian Kessler thought he had buried that encounter beneath routine paperwork and muscle memory, the truth was already on its way back to his desk, in a plain manila envelope, with a seal that meant, this isn't going away. Sergeant Brian Kessler didn't see it coming. He thought the night ended with a citation, a scoff, and a forgettable file in the system. But 3 days later, a plain manila envelope landed on his desk with weight far heavier than paper. Sender Lucas County Civil Court. Subject formal notice to appear. Inside a summons. Plaintiff Lieutenant Colonel Camille Rhodes. Allegations, unlawful detainment, abuse of authority, violation of constitutional rights. He stood in the parking lot, staring at the letter like it was written in a foreign language. He smirked, let out a low, disbelieving chuckle, and muttered to himself, She's really trying this, but the courthouse seal said otherwise. Back at Fort Wayne, Camille Rhodes wasn't smiling either. But her silence didn't come from uncertainty. It came from precision. She had reviewed every frame of both recordings, hers and his. She had compiled her own after-action report, complete with timestamps, de-escalation protocol violations, and her full military credentials. There was no need to embellish. The video was damning enough. Her aide, Sergeant Hayes, stepped into her office and closed the door gently behind him. "Ma'am, the footage is making its way through the channels. I've already looped in JAG and the Inspector General's office." Camille looked up, her expression unreadable but firm. "Good. It needed to be done." He hesitated. "Are you sure you want to go public with this?" "I'm not chasing headlines," she said calmly. "I'm chasing accountability." She wasn't angry anymore. Anger was reactive. Camille had moved into something far more dangerous for people like Kessler strategy. For 2 decades, she had led with integrity in silence, deployed under fire, made split-second decisions that affected lives, supervised humanitarian corridors, and commanded entire supply chains across continents. Her leadership wasn't a title, it was proven, tested, and earned under pressure. But none of that had mattered the night she was pulled over. To Kessler, she had been just another woman with tinted windows and calm defiance. One more person to belittle, to command, to corner. And that's what haunted her, not just his words or tone, but how comfortable he had been while violating her rights. As if it were routine, as if no one had ever challenged him before. But that time was over. She made her final call that morning, not to the press, not to a podium, but to her attorney, Jordan Blake. "I'm not just filing a complaint," she said. "We're going to court." Blake was silent for a beat. "You know this won't stay quiet forever. I'm counting on that," Camille said. And she meant it. This wasn't vengeance. This was structure, order. A statement not for herself, but for every soldier she had trained, every civilian she had mentored, and every black woman who had been silenced at the side of a road. Back in Toledo, Brian Kessler tossed the envelope onto his desk like it was junk mail. He still thought this would blow over. But somewhere beneath the surface, the ground had already begun to shift. He just didn't hear the rumble yet. Sergeant Brian Kessler still didn't take it seriously, even with the court date printed in black and white. Even with his name listed next to allegations of unlawful detainment and civil rights violations, he skimmed the document in the parking lot of the precinct, muttered, "This is a joke," and shoved it into his glove compartment like a receipt from a gas station. But inside the station, the air had changed. People didn't say it out loud, not yet, but the shift was palpable. Conversations cut short when he walked into the room. Colleagues stopped making eye contact. The sideways glances weren't curiosity anymore. They were caution. Then came the call to the captain's office. Door closed, blinds drawn, tone colder than usual. "Sit down," said Captain Langston, his voice clipped. Kessler dropped into the chair, arms crossed. "Let me guess. About the woman from the stop. She's trying to make this a thing." Langston didn't return the smirk. "She's not trying to make it a thing. Brian, it is a thing. And you need to understand exactly who you pulled over?" Kessler scoffed. "Some military type with an attitude. She's not some military type. She's Lieutenant Colonel Camille Rhodes, Bronze Star, 2 combat deployments, head of operational logistics at Fort Wayne. Her record's clean. Her connections are national. And she's got video from both angles." Kessler shrugged. "So what? I didn't touch her. I didn't arrest her. I did my job." Langston leaned forward, eyes hard. "Did your job? You opened her door without explanation, demanded a sobriety test without probable cause. You escalated before you even knew who she was. I followed protocol? No, the captain snapped. You followed ego? For the first time in a long while? Kessler didn't have a comeback, because deep down, even he knew this wasn't about a single stop. It was about a pattern, a history, a badge that had become a shield for behavior no one wanted to look too closely at. But now, they were being forced to. The civil rights suit was public record. Internal Affairs was on alert. Military legal channels were watching. And if the press caught wind, which they would, it was going to explode. Kessler tried to act unbothered. He stood up like he still had the high ground. She didn't get arrested. She didn't even yell. I was firm. That's not illegal. Langston didn't blink. No. But that's the problem. You thought firmness was enough. You thought intimidation was standard procedure. And now, she's holding up a mirror. He let those words hang in the air. Then added, and for once, Brian, the department isn't going to turn away. You're on your own. Outside the office. The silence deepened. No more locker room swagger. No more rookie reverence. Kessler wasn't the alpha anymore. He was wounded, and the pack could smell blood. Back at Fort Wayne, Camille wasn't pacing, wasn't flustered, wasn't seeking revenge. She was preparing with the same strategic calm she used when organizing disaster relief operations or leading convoys through hostile terrain. There was no press conference, no public statement, only private meetings with her legal team, a meticulous breakdown of the footage, and a timeline so clean it could be entered into military record. She wasn't after a settlement. She was after precedent. This wasn't about punishing one cop. It was about creating a moment that lived longer than headlines, a case that couldn't be buried behind a badge, a ripple that reminded the system not everyone you try to silence stays quiet. And Sergeant Brian Kessler, he still didn't see the storm coming. But this time, the storm had a name. The courthouse didn't know what to expect. But Camille Rhodes did. She wasn't coming to make a scene. She wasn't coming to play the victim. She was coming to draw a line, one that should have never been crossed. While Brian Kessler scrambled behind closed doors, deflecting blame and calling it a misunderstanding, Camille was in a quiet conference room with her legal team, reviewing every second of footage with military precision. 2 camera angles, 3 incident reports, 6 policy violations. She didn't raise her voice. She sharpened her case. Across the table, her attorney, Jordan Blake, leaned forward. You really want to go through with this? It's public? Messy? People will dig? Camille looked up, voice calm. Let them dig. I have nothing to hide. Jordan studied her. Most people would have just walked away. Taken the apology? Maybe the payout? I'm not most people, Camille replied. And she wasn't. She'd spent 22 years in service, not just surviving chaos, but organizing it, directing convoys through insurgent territory, coordinating emergency response after natural disasters, holding the lives of hundreds in her decisions. Every stripe on her shoulder was earned with blood, dust, and restraint. But none of that mattered the night she got pulled over. To Kessler, she wasn't a decorated officer. She was just a woman with calm eyes and the audacity not to tremble. And now, she would face him again, but not on the side of the road. This time, on record. When she stepped into the courtroom, everything stopped. No words, no gasps. Just the sound of quiet recognition. Full dress uniform, medals shining. Her rank displayed like a shield, not of ego, but of earned weight. She didn't walk in seeking approval. She walked in demanding respect without asking for it. Kessler was already seated at the defense table. He turned when she entered, and for a fleeting second, Something broke in his posture. A twitch of the jaw. A shift in the eyes. The false confidence wavered. He wasn't facing a complaint. He was facing a commander. As Camille took the stand, the courtroom leaned forward, military officers, civilians, and strangers alike. Some came for curiosity. Others came to witness something rare. A woman who'd carried the burden of duty for 2 decades. Now holding the system accountable with the same discipline she once held a convoy together under fire. The judge nodded respectfully. "Lieutenant Colonel Rhodes, thank you for your service. You may proceed." Jordan Blake didn't waste time. "Colonel, can you describe the night in question?" Camille's voice was steady. "I was returning from a regional command meeting. I was driving alone. I was not speeding, not swerving. I was pulled over without explanation." "Were you cooperative?" "Yes." "Did you raise your voice?" "No." "Did you resist in any way?" "No." She paused, then added, "I asked for clarification. In return, I was threatened, cornered, and tested for sobriety without cause." Jordan nodded. "And what made you begin recording the encounter?" Camille met the jury's eyes. "Because I've learned that silence doesn't protect you. Evidence does." Then came the footage. First, Camille's phone, crisp, clean, calm. Then Kessler's body cam, his tone, his stance, his hand hovering too close to his holster. The condescension, the unnecessary field test, the way he looked at her like she was an inconvenience instead of a citizen. You could feel the shift in the room. Not outrage. Reckoning. The lights dimmed as the screen lit up again. 2 camera angles. One night, one truth. Camille's footage played first. Silent, steady. Her voice calm, her hands visible, her questions reasonable. Then came Kessler's body cam, raw, unfiltered, and damning. The courtroom watched in rapt silence as the scene unfolded. Kessler's clipped commands. His posture tight with authority, not caution. The hand that hovered near his weapon, even when she was still. The smirk when he realized she was military, and the contempt that followed. No words needed to be spoken yet. The jury felt it. So did the room, and then cross-examination. Alan Croft, the defense attorney, approached the stand wearing the polished smile of a man who knew he was walking a razor's edge. "Lieutenant Colonel Rhodes, with all due respect," he began carefully. "Is it possible that Sergeant Kessler was simply doing his job following department protocol?" Camille met his gaze without blinking. "No." He nodded slowly, trying to find cracks in her steel. "Is it possible he perceived a threat or was concerned for your safety?" "I was calm. I was compliant. There was no erratic driving, no impairment. The only threat present was his unwillingness to explain himself." Croft shifted. "And yet, you chose to record the stop. Why?" "Because I've been in enough situations to know that when power goes unchecked, silence becomes complicity. I wanted proof." Croft's smile faltered. "So you don't believe officers should have discretion during traffic stops?" Camille didn't hesitate. "I believe discretion without discipline becomes danger. A badge is not a license, it's a responsibility." The line landed like a gavel hitting hardwood. Even the judge sat back in his chair, eyebrows slightly raised. Then it was Kessler's turn. But he didn't take the stand, not willingly. He sat at the defense table, stone-faced, arms locked across his chest like a man refusing to flinch, even as the truth undressed his authority in front of everyone. The prosecutor stood, voice quiet, controlled. "Sergeant Kessler, why did you ask Lieutenant Colonel Rhodes to exit the vehicle?" She seemed evasive. Kessler replied, Did she disobey any commands? She questioned me? Is questioning an officer unlawful? Kessler paused. No. Did she raise her voice? Make threats? No. So what caused you to escalate the stop? He said nothing. Sergeant Kessler, were you aware she was a federal officer at the time? No. And if you had known there was a long silence, then, finally. Kessler exhaled. I probably would have handled it differently. That was it. Not remorse, not reflection, just reluctant honesty. And in that moment, the court saw it. He hadn't seen a threat. He had seen a woman who didn't fold, and it unsettled him. But Camille Rhodes wasn't here to make him comfortable. She was here to remind the courtroom and the system that power must answer for itself. And now, with the footage laid bare, the silence broken, and the truth undeniable, there was only one question left. What does accountability really look like? 3 days later, the courtroom was quiet, but not empty. No cameras, no media frenzy, just a few civilians in the back row, a clerk flipping through files, and two people on opposite sides of justice. Lieutenant Colonel Camille Rhodes, in uniform, seated still and composed. Sergeant Brian Kessler, in a suit that didn't quite fit, jaw tight, fingers locked together as if bracing for impact. Judge Naomi Benton entered the room with a folder in hand and the weight of the state on her shoulders. She didn't look at either party right away. She simply began. In the matter of Rhodes v. Kessler, the jury has reached a unanimous verdict. No one moved. No one even shifted in their seat. We find in favor of the plaintiff. The words dropped like iron. Kessler's head snapped slightly to the side. His attorney whispered something, but his eyes stayed on the judge. Camille didn't flinch, didn't exhale, just listened. The court recognizes that Sergeant Kessler's actions during the traffic stop in question constituted a violation of constitutional rights. The detainment was unlawful. The conduct was not aligned with department policy or basic standards of professional duty. Still no sound, no dramatic gasp, just the slow unraveling of invincibility. While no criminal charges will be filed at this time. Judge Benton continued. The plaintiff is entitled to damages in the amount of $35,000, and this verdict will be entered into permanent public record. Kessler's attorney, Alan Croft, leaned closer and whispered, "We'll appeal." But even he didn't sound convinced. The judge wasn't finished. This ruling will be forwarded to the Department of Justice and the Toledo Police Department for internal review and policy assessment, and then it was over. Not with noise, but with the cold, clear sound of accountability. Camille stood. She didn't smile, didn't nod to anyone. She simply acknowledged the truth in the silence. She had done what needed to be done. Without screaming, without breaking, just by standing firm. Outside the courthouse, Kessler hovered near the stairs, folder shielding his face as the first local reporters arrived. They shouted his name. He didn't respond. He got in his car and drove away quieter than he had ever been. Inside, in the hallway near the elevators, Camille took out her phone. A notification blinked, "Verdict in your favor. Case closed." Her attorney, Jordan Blake, caught up. "You could have asked for more." Camille shook her head. "I wasn't here for more." Jordan raised an eyebrow. "Do you think it'll actually change anything?" Camille looked out through the glass doors and said, without hesitation, "Maybe not the system. But maybe next time he'll think twice before pulling someone else over." The verdict was public. The ruling, permanent. And the silence afterward, deafening. A week later, Sergeant Brian Kessler received the order he never expected: administrative leave, pending internal review. He stood in the locker room with the memo in his hand, surrounded by a dozen officers, pretending not to look. No one offered him a nod. No one said tough break, because it wasn't a break. It was a reckoning. The man who used to swagger through the precinct now walked like he was dragging the weight of his own name behind him. The badge that once gave him authority now felt more like a spotlight, and everyone could see the cracks beneath it. Rumors spread fast. Some said he'd be reassigned to desk duty. Others whispered this was the beginning of the end. Either way, the shield that once protected him had fractured, and the truth had wedged itself in the gap. But while Kessler unraveled in quiet corners of the department, Camille Rhodes returned to her post at Fort Wayne like nothing had changed. Because for her, it hadn't been about winning. It had been about witnessing, about holding the line when no one else would. She didn't do interviews. She didn't post statements. There was no podium, no social media thread, no hashtag campaign. She simply walked back into her command as she always had, composed, resolute, and unshakably clear about who she was. But the people around her saw it. The soldiers she trained, the officers she briefed, the junior lieutenants who watched the news and said nothing but stood straighter when she entered the room. They understood, because power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it walks in silence and commands the air. And that was Camille's real victory, not the money, not the courtroom, but the message. You don't have to shatter to prove you were struck. You don't have to scream to prove you were silenced. And you don't have to break the rules to break the cycle. The courthouse had closed the case, but the weight of what she carried would echo long after the gavel. And within the ranks of a military base tucked away in Indiana, the lesson lingered. You don't earn respect by demanding it. You earn it by surviving injustice with grace, and wielding power not as a weapon, but as a standard. 2 months later, the courtroom was a memory. But Camille Rhodes had never been more present. She stood in front of a room full of recruits' fresh uniforms, uncreased ambition, and eyes that hadn't yet seen how heavy the weight of service could become. She wasn't there to talk about combat tactics or logistical chains. Not today. She was there to talk about something quieter, harder, more dangerous than war zones and convoy routes. Power. She let the silence breathe before she spoke. Raise your hand, she said evenly. If you believe a uniform automatically earns you respect? A few hands rose, some with hesitation, one or two with too much confidence. Camille nodded, as if she had expected it. I get it, she said. You put on these stripes, this patch, this badge, and the world should see you differently, should listen when you speak, should follow when you lead. She took a few steps forward. But here's the truth. No one owes you respect because of what you wear. They owe you nothing until you prove who you are without the uniform. The room stilled. Even the ones who had fidgeted went still. Respect, she continued, is earned in silence, in restraint, in what you do when no one is watching, and most importantly, in how you treat someone who can't fight back. She let that sink in. Then came the shift. I was pulled over on a quiet road one night. I was calm. I was compliant. I was a lieutenant colonel in the United States Army. But none of that mattered. She paused. What mattered was that I didn't yell. I didn't resist. I didn't walk away. I stood my ground with truth, with protocol, and with proof. And I faced a man who thought a badge made him untouchable. Camille looked out at them not as a commander, but as a mirror. He saw the rank on my chest later. But what really shook him was the discipline I carried when I said nothing. A recruit in the back shifted, visibly moved. Another leaned in, brows furrowed, absorbing something more than instruction, absorbing identity. She closed the folder in her hand. Leadership, she said, is not about barking orders. It's about showing what it looks like when strength meets humility, and what it means to carry power without becoming corrupted by it. Her voice lowered, deliberate. You don't represent the uniform. You represent everyone who ever wore it before you, and everyone who will wear it after you. Act like it. She walked off the platform. No applause, no salutes, just silence. The kind of silence that comes after truth has been spoken and something inside you has shifted. She didn't make headlines. She made history in silence. Lieutenant Colonel Camille Rhodes didn't win her case by yelling. She didn't have to tear anything down. She didn't need a viral clip, a press tour, or a protest sign. She simply stood her ground with grace sharp as steel and proof that could not be ignored. And the system blinked first. Across the city, Sergeant Brian Kessler's name no longer carried the same weight. The bravado that once filled rooms now echoed against empty lockers and cold stares. He had not lost a badge, at least. Not yet. But he had lost something deeper, the illusion of being untouchable. And that loss echoed louder than any courtroom verdict. But for Camille, there was never a finish line, only a threshold. This was not about a single stop. It was about all the stops that never made it to court. All the voices that never got heard. All the women, especially women of color, who had swallowed injustice just to make it home. This time, one of them spoke, and the system had to listen. Back at Fort Wayne, Camille didn't change. She didn't need to. She continued training soldiers, reviewing ops, and building future leaders. But within the silence of her presence, something lingered. A lesson, a reminder, a quiet revolution. That sometimes you don't need to shout to shake the ground. Sometimes you don't have to fight to win. You just have to show up when it matters most. And when you do, make sure the world remembers that silence isn't surrender. It's strategy. So let this be your call. Your echo. Your legacy authority without accountability is nothing but a mask. But courage is the mirror that shatters it. Speak when it's hardest. Stand when it's loneliest. And when they try to make you small, let your silence remind them who you are.